The warning came softly at first, almost lost beneath the roar of the storm. Rain lashed the cabin walls, driven sideways by the wind, and the lantern hanging from a nail trembled with each gust, casting warped shadows that stretched and shrank like living things. The woman stood near the door, her cloak dripping onto the rough wooden floor, boots caked with mud from miles of hard travel. She had asked for shelter, nothing more. Her voice had been calm then, controlled, as if she had practiced the words long before she ever reached this place. Just until morning, she had said earlier. I won't be trouble. Now that calm was gone. Her fingers clenched around the strap of her bag as if it were the last solid thing in the world. Don't take advantage, she said again, louder this time, her eyes finally lifting to meet his. There was fear there, yes, but also something else, certainty. As if she knew exactly what kind of man isolation could turn someone into. The rancher didn't answer. He hadn't spoken much in years, not since the nearest town had withered away and the people he once knew had scattered or died. Words felt unnecessary out here. The land understood silence. He told himself that bringing her in had been the right thing to do, that any decent man would have done the same. But decency was a habit, and habits fade when no one is watching. Thunder rolled overhead, close enough to make the walls groan. She flinched, stepping back until her shoulders brushed the door. The cabin felt smaller now, the air thick and warm from the fire. He could smell wet wool, smoke, and the sharp edge of rain. Every detail pressed in on him, magnified by the years he'd spent alone with only his thoughts for company. Thoughts that did not always behave. I mean it, she said, her voice shaking despite her effort to steady it. I trusted you. That word landed heavier than any accusation. Trusted. He told himself she was wrong, that she was reading danger where there was none. He told himself a lot of things. The storm raged on, sealing the world outside, making the cabin feel cut off from time itself. In that moment, it seemed as if nothing existed beyond those walls, no consequences, no tomorrow, no one who would ever know what happened on this night. The lantern flickered, dimming, then brightening again. Shadows crawled across the ceiling like dark water. She took another step back, then stopped when she realized there was nowhere left to go. Her breathing quickened. Please, she said. Don't cross that line. Something in her tone changed then. It wasn't just fear. It was warning. The kind that came from somewhere deeper than instinct, as if the words had been spoken many times before, in many different places, to many different men. The rancher felt a brief, sharp unease, a sense that he was standing at the edge of something he did not fully understand. For a heartbeat, he considered stepping away, opening the door, letting her disappear back into the storm. But loneliness has a way of twisting hesitation into resentment. He thought of the empty years, the endless days broken only by work and silence. He thought of how unfair it felt that the world still asked him to be good when it had given him so little in return. The fire crackled, sparks jumping upward like tiny stars burning out as quickly as they appeared. She turned her face away, as if already bracing herself for whatever came next. The storm outside seemed to soften, its roar fading into a distant, steady drum. The quiet that followed was worse. It pressed down on the cabin, heavy and unnatural, as though the land itself were listening. Time lost its shape after that. There was no single moment that could be pointed to, no clear sound or movement that marked the crossing. It happened the way cracks form in old wood, slowly, invisibly, until one day the board splits and there is no fixing it. When it was over, the lantern burned low, its light weak and yellow. The fire had sunk into embers. She stood very still, her face pale, eyes unfocused. She said nothing. That silence cut deeper than any scream could have. The rancher felt a tightness in his chest, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. He waited for relief, for the release he had convinced himself would come. It didn't. Instead, a cold weight settled over him, spreading through his limbs, rooting him to the floor. Without looking at him, she gathered her things. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were memorizing the room, the scarred table, the crooked chair, the rifle above the hearth. When she reached the door, she paused. For a moment, he thought she might speak again. Warn him. Curse him. Beg him to understand what he had done. She did none of those things. She opened the door and stepped into the night. The storm had passed. Moonlight spilled across the plains, silver and unforgiving. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. The rancher stood alone, the silence now complete. Outside, the land stretched endlessly, calm and watchful. He tried to tell himself it was over, that dawn would come and life would return to its familiar shape. But the cabin felt different, as if something had been marked, claimed. The shadows no longer shifted with the firelight. They waited. He didn't know it yet, but the warning had not been for that night alone. It had been for everything that would follow morning came without comfort. The sky was pale and washed out, as if the color had been drained overnight. Sunlight slipped through the cabin's single window and landed on the floor, touching the place where the woman had stood. The rancher woke with a start, heart hammering, unsure for a moment where he was. Then memory returned, slow and merciless. The silence felt louder than the storm had been, pressing in on his ears until he wished for thunder again. He rose and moved through the cabin like a stranger, touching things as if to prove they were real. The chair. The table. The door. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, calm and indifferent. No footprints marked the ground. No sign that anyone else had ever been there. It was as if the night had been swallowed whole. He told himself that was good. No evidence meant no consequences. Yet the relief he expected never arrived. As the day wore on, unease followed him like a second shadow. The horses refused to settle, snorting and pulling against their tethers. Even the cattle seemed restless, lowing softly, eyes wide and alert. He tried to focus on work, on the familiar rhythm of chores, but his hands shook. Every sound made him turn, expecting to see her standing there, watching. By midday, the air had grown unnaturally still. No wind stirred the grass. No birds crossed the sky. That was when he saw them, dark shapes on the horizon, moving steadily closer. Riders. His stomach tightened. No one came out this way by accident. He stood at the edge of his land, squinting against the sun, counting them as they approached. 5. No, 6. They rode in without greeting, dust rising around their horses like smoke. Their faces were hard, unreadable, eyes fixed on him with a certainty that made his mouth go dry. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask what they wanted, but the words died before they reached his tongue. He already knew. One of the men dismounted slowly, boots hitting the ground with deliberate weight. "You had a visitor last night," he said. It wasn't a question. The rancher shook his head. "No one stayed," he lied, too quickly. "Just a traveler." She left. The man studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "They always say that." Hands grabbed the rancher's arms before he could step back. He struggled, shouting that there was no proof, that they had the wrong man. His voice sounded thin even to his own ears. They didn't argue. They didn't need to. They dragged him toward the cabin, forcing him to his knees in front of the door. That was when he saw it. Carved into the wood, deep and old, were words he recognized instantly. "Don't take advantage. Don't cross that line." The letters were worn smooth by time, yet unmistakable. Beneath them ran a column of names, some barely legible, others sharp and fresh. He leaned closer despite himself, heart pounding as he read them. Men who had lived alone. Men who had vanished, whose lands now lay abandoned or claimed by others. Stories he had heard once and dismissed as rumor. "There's room for yours," one of the writers said quietly. Panic surged through him. "You can't do this," he shouted. "You don't know what happened." Another man stepped forward, his expression almost weary. "We know enough." They tied his hands and led him away from the cabin, toward a lone post driven into the hard earth. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains. No one raised a weapon. No one shouted. The calm of it all was worse than violence. It felt rehearsed, ritualized. As they secured him to the post, his gaze drifted back to the cabin door. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in the reflection of the window. A figure standing just inside, watching. His breath caught. "She's there," he said hoarsely. "She's still here." The riders followed his gaze, then looked back at him. One of them almost smiled. "She always is." The sky darkened as evening fell, stars pricking through the fading light. The land grew cold, the silence deepening until it felt alive. The rancher's fear twisted into something else then, understanding. The woman hadn't been a traveler. She hadn't been lost. She had been sent. Or summoned. A test repeated over generations, carried out wherever isolation bred entitlement and cruelty. The riders mounted their horses and turned away. "By morning," the first man said, "the land will be balanced again." They rode off, leaving him alone with the post, the dark, and his thoughts. Hours passed. The cold seeped into his bones. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, its cry echoing like a warning. He screamed until his voice broke, until there was nothing left but sobbing and the sound of his own breath. Near dawn, the air shifted. He felt it before he saw it. A presence, standing just beyond the edge of his vision. He lifted his head with effort, eyes burning. She stood a few steps away, unchanged, her expression calm, almost sad. Moonlight passed through her as if she were made of smoke. "I told you," she said softly. As the first light of day crept over the plains, the land grew still once more. When the riders returned, there was nothing left at the post but empty rope and undisturbed earth. The cabin stood alone, the warning on its door waiting for the next name.